Good morning. Hello, my name is Gary Scudder. I'm a professor here in the Core, ably assisted by the excellent Linda, who we will obviously doubtless be losing soon to Hollywood now that she's filmed another Core talk, and I do appreciate the help. Today I want to talk a little bit about a class that I actually loved, and it's Heroines and Heroes, and talk about two other subjects I actually love, Karl Marx and Charles Dickens. When we teach Heroines and Heroes, we use different lenses to try to, it's a funny class because it is very much a theory-based class. I always tell my students that this is arguably the most theory-based class that you'll take at Champlain College. That yes, you get to study your favorite heroine or hero, but you also have to do it through a very scholarly lens. So it might be psychoanalytical literary criticism or feminist literary criticism, or in this case, Marxist literary criticism. And we use the Barry book, which gives a nice introduction to these things. And Barry, in his chapter on Marx, I think lays out Marxist literary criticism very well. Now, so I have this, as I discussed before in other core talks, what I always do is I have the students, I stretch it out over a week. And the first meeting, which is normally the end of 1 week, we will actually get into the Barry book and talk about his discussion of these different lenses. And Barry's nice because he will literally say, besides giving you an introduction to whatever lens he's talking about, he'll then give you a nice little box that says these are the 5 or 7 or 10 things that literary critics do. So it gives you some very nice conceptual tools. So we talk about that. The next meeting, which is always going to be, I set it up so it's the first meeting of the following week, they have to write a paper based on a short story that I've chosen where they use the conceptual tools of that particular lens to analyze the short story. And I very carefully got in my way to pick out short stories which I think lend themselves very well to analysis by that. In this case, what I have them read is the second ghost section of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And they are then supposed to analyze it using Marxist literary criticism. And they write a 3-page paper on it. And I set it up so it slides over both sides of the weekend, so that way they have a little bit more time to think about it and let it percolate before they write the paper. The reason why I chose Dickens and the reason why I chose A Christmas Carol is because I think it works wonderfully well. I mean, you've got your classic Dickensian social criticism. You've got the sort of nasty, greedy bourgeois swine in Ebenezer Scrooge. You get interpretations of the suffering of the poor. So it works very well. And I've had a lot of success with it. In fact, that's what I was doing this morning, which is why I'm having this discussion right now with you, because it's still fresh in my mind. What Barry does is he tends to give you a lot of different aspects of whatever literary criticism he's talking about. And he does this with Marxist literary criticism. But what I do is I focus on 3 of them. First off, I talk specifically about what Marx said about literary criticism, which is really not much. He talked mainly about the notion of the superstructure and the base. And the superstructure is literature or ideas or religion, which is on top of the base. And the base meaning economic factors. And how everything that we consider to be real and important is really just superstructure stuff, which is completely influenced by the economic base. Beyond that, Marx didn't really say a lot about it. And as we know, Marx loved literature. So maybe didn't feel like ruining it by overanalyzing it too much. So we talk a little about Marx. We say a few things about Lenin, because by the time you get to Lenin, Lenin has a much more specific and I would say much harsher view of what art should be. That is, art should serve the revolution, and that's it. And then we get into Althusser, one of the later writers. And Althusser is really, really interesting because he's the one who talks about the notion of this battle for control. And there is both state power and also state control. And state power is what we think controls us, what we think makes us do what we do. It's the police or the military or the jails. But Althusser would argue that actually what makes us do what we do is state control. That's the ideological aspects of it. It's religion. It's the American dream. Or I tell the students it's every really bad, dumb romance movie you've been dragged to that makes you think you should go get married and have 3 kids and buy a house. So that's actually what makes you do what you do. And he also talks about the notion of interpolation, which is that sort of card game wherein you think that you're making a choice when actually you're not making a choice. So those are the three things in Barry that I focus on. Now, how does this work with A Christmas Carol? Well, the reason why I think it works very nicely is because on the most basic level, the students can talk about the message that Dickens is providing and the critique of capitalism, or at least capitalism run amok and greed, and this almost romanticization of the lower classes. But it also allows the students to look at the life of Dickens himself. And this is one of the things that you see with a lot of literary criticism, is that split between the overt and the covert. It doesn't matter whether it's psychoanalytical or feminist or Marxist, what's going on in the story as compared to what's going on beneath the surface. And one way you get at that is to look at the author's life themselves. And, you know, because Dickens is so famous, it's very easy for students to track down Dickens's life and talk about his father being in prison for debt. So it feeds in very nicely. It also works, I think, because it makes the students ask a very basic question. So if you're living at about the same time as Marx, why did you, Dickens, not become a communist or socialist revolutionary? So in what ways were you impacted by your age and your social and economic status and experience? In what ways were you not? Why did you take a different path? Which also gives us in the sense of the artist as a free individual. What's also interesting about it is the notion of, and not all the students get to this point, and it's one of those things that you like as a professor where you're asking the students to do things which are more complicated. The students who really get into Althusser will suddenly look at this story in a different way. That, yes, it's nice that Dickens has gone out of his way to talk about the failings of the system. However, could you make the argument that A Christmas Carol itself is actually the very definition of state control? Because it is an ideological structure, it is a novel, which makes you think that you've done something. It sells this notion that this greedy capitalist learned his lesson and now he's the best father that the city of London ever had. So you're creating this mythology. So you don't have to really do anything because in the end the system will reform itself. And not many students get to that point, but it's a very interesting sort of spin on what you want to do with Dickens. And how much credit do you want to give Dickens? So it's always worked very well. If I have time at the end of class, and I tend to have class, I usually show the students about 5 minutes of the classic Eisenstein film Potemkin, Battleship Potemkin, and talk about the notion of art as product of the revolution. That Lenin, understanding that not many people in Russia could read and write, so printing out a bunch of pamphlets wouldn't do him much good, is the first world leader to understand the potential of this new medium of film. So he pays a guy like Eisenstein to create. So if you ever take a legitimate film class, you always start with the Russian masters. And I always show them about 5 minutes of the famous Odessa step scene, which is so symbolic. And for that matter, they can literally even draw parallels to Star Wars in how you interpret the suffering of the masses who are very personified as compared to the faceless and nameless and expressionless robots of the Tsar. And it really gets at this sense of art as a product of the state. And again, Lenin would say that all art, if it doesn't serve the revolution, is just bourgeois sentimentality. But then if we have time, we can then take it to the point and say, well, isn't it true that really all art serves the state? If all art is providing this notion of the American dream, isn't this essentially what Lenin said? So anyway, it works very well. The students have no idea, they haven't really read much Dickens, but they sort of get a whole new sense of Dickens. And it takes a subject which in their mind can be rather dry and makes it pretty interesting. So I've had a lot of success with it. As always, I have PowerPoints I'd be happy to share. And otherwise, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop me a line. Thank you.